When you and I talked a couple of years ago, at that time you said that the book review had not yet reviewed a book that was available to readers only in ebook format. In the 2 years after that, do you remember if anything did get reviewed while you were the editor that was only available as an ebook?
No, Len, and in a way we were helped out because, as you know, so many books are published now at multiple vehicles or platforms, as they call them. So at that point, there was a real lag between the time a book would be published, say, in hardcover, and then come out in ebook. Of course, another thing, as you know very well, has happened since then, which is that there is a cascading volume of much smaller books, ebook only, Kindle singles, and byliner books and such. And as yet, we've not solved that problem. Why is it a problem? Because it just, in the most practical terms, it so enormously increases
Yeah.
the volume of material, of print, or electronic printed matter or reading matter we'd be looking at, that we're just not geared up to do it. So eventually, might that change? Probably, or maybe if the economics of newspapers do. At this point, we don't have the staff to preview, as we say, so many books that are done in ebook format, which is kind of a shame for many reasons. Not least, most selfishly, is I may be writing an ebook myself for the paper before too long, and I know it won't be reviewed in the time.
Well, yeah, because the Times now has a partnership with Byliner that has put out some really terrific stuff. Do you have anything queued up that might end up showing up on that Byliner New York Times publication schedule?
Something I'm writing?
Yeah.
Yes, we're talking about something, but it's so early stage now that I don't want to jinx it. You know how writers are. Whenever you talk about something, it never seems to happen. But it's possible I'll do that. Although I have to tell you, like, we discussed doing that, paradoxical though it seems, before I became a full-time writer. So now that I'm going to be a full-time writer, I may not have time to write any.
That's right. Well, I'd like to talk a little about the podcast. When I went back in the archives on the website, it looked like the earliest show that is there was actually 7 years ago yesterday, April 30th, 2006. Do you remember whether that was actually the first episode you did? That would have been about 2 years after you became editor at the Book Review.
Len, do you remember who the guests were?
Let's see. No, I didn't write that
Okay.
down.
The reason I ask is, if it included an author, that it's unlikely that was our first, because we didn't start doing that for several months. What happened was, it was very much Wayne's World. In the Old Times building, it would be me and colleagues at the Book Review, editors talking about books and reviews that had come in. And then publishers began approaching us and started putting us on the publicity tour for authors. And that's when we started getting authors, sometimes extremely prominent ones, as you know, coming in to do the podcast. My recollection is that we started in 2005, but you could be right that it was 2006.
Yeah.
Our great producer, Jocelyn Gonzalez, estimates that I've interviewed over the years some 1,100 to 1,200 people. And I'm enormously proud of that, because I'm someone who normally doesn't let anybody else get a word in edgewise. And to think they actually did that makes me feel pretty good.
Well, now on interviews, that amazing number that you've done, 1,100 interviews, probably more. With that kind of experience, when you listen to an interview or watch an interview, what are you looking for? What surprises you or gratifies you when you see someone else doing that work that you've done so much of?
Well, first of all, I am very much an amateur at this. Years ago, when I was a guest on Don Imus's program because of a book I'd written, he told me the interviewer he admired most was Brian Lamb on C-SPAN. And I had been a guest on Brian Lamb's program and was a big fan. And the first few times I watched him, we were 15 years ago or more, I thought, well, this guy's not very smart. He's asking these very obvious questions. And then after about the third time, I got it. that by asking the simple question and not answering it yourself, you allow your interviewee room to go in whatever direction he or she wants to. So something you learn to do is not be afraid of sounding and actually being dumb. Guest on, and I say, well, Mr. Amos, it seems to me this is what your novel does. And he says, well, no, that's exactly what it doesn't do. Part of me cringes, but I know as a listener, I'm thinking, okay, now Martin Amos is going to set me straight. The listener identifies, I think, empathizes with the host a little bit. One is the surrogate for the listener, not the debating, rival of the guest. And so to keep the question short and simple, just the way you do, let the listener open up whatever direction they want to get. If they say something that makes me sound silly, I probably am silly. And if the listener is deriving something from it, all the better.
Well, now that you have a more fluid work schedule, have you set a new deadline for your biography of William F. Buckley?
Well, I have just sent quite a number of pages off to my new editor. I've been on this book for so long. My beloved editor, Bob Loomis at Random House, actually retired. Editor John Meacham, a biographer himself. And I'm waiting to hear from him. So if you're listening, John, be kind. But I'd hope to have it done in a year or so. I have to figure out the new schedule I have. My problem as a biographer and writer in general, aside from a conspicuous lack of talent, is that I put everything in, and then I have to take it all out. There's that famous exchange, you may remember, between F. Scott Fitzgerald and Thomas Wolfe. And Fitzgerald says, well, I'm a taker-outer and you're a putter-inner. I'm both. I put everything in, and then I have to take it out later, and I can't help myself. Because when I'm putting it in, I think it's really important what grades Bill Buckley got in prep school when he was 14. Seems really crucial fact to have at the time. Then only later do I realize it's not much consequence. So it's taking me a while to do. And the book gets bigger and bigger, but there's still many years to cover.
You've got an interesting beat now, at least it was how it was described by Jill Abramson and Dean Paquette in their memo announcing the new duties. They said that you will be a writer at large and take a Richard Hofstadter-like approach to reporting on the ideological and historical roots and emerging character of today's roiling political movements. And I know you've weighed in on some of these topics, especially about conservatism and everything. And one thing I've noticed is that you very seldom seem to take offense when the predictable attacks or denunciations of your writing come your way. And I think I'd just like to close by asking, what's the secret to your equanimity and your ability to maintain kind of a serenity in a pretty rough playground of ideas that you've come to be very active in?
Well, it's very kind of you, Len. I have to say, what you're not taking offense and equanimity is public. Privately, I'm stomping around and shouting like everybody else. Well, one learns from one's betters, and one of my heroes, I'm not ashamed to say, I wrote a profile of him not long ago, Gary Wills, doesn't really respond a whole lot. I think one has had one say, and I learned this early on. When my Whittaker Chambers biography came out, I was unhappy about a review. I think that ran at Slate. Which was a fairly new publication then, and I was a great admirer of Michael Kinsley, who had founded it, and I sent him a note complaining about it. And he said, you know what, if you don't want people criticizing your books, then don't write them. And I think that's view I try to take with the essays and journalism as well, is the world is not waiting to hear what I have to say about anything, and they're not, and there's not a universe of readers who feel obligated to agree with it or like it or think I'm smart or think I'm saying something interesting. People are allowed to say whatever they want. I've had my say, they get theirs, and in the end, nobody really remembers. So there, I just try to keep in mind that the best thing I had to say was the thing I wrote, and anything thereafter is going to diminish it in some way. And also, people forget, and if the work is good, readers will circle back to it and find something in it, and that's really what matters, rather than whether one can score points in a back and forth with one's detractors or critics or skeptics or whatever. It's not really very edifying to do. I don't like reading it when other people do it, and I assume they won't like it when I do. You know, there's a great thing Bob Dylan said many, many years ago when he had that wonderful song, Possibly Fourth Street. And somebody surmised that maybe it was written in response to criticism he'd gotten. And said, I would never write a song about a critic. That's more than that. And while I can be, profane and loudmouth and sensitive and thin-skinned and obnoxious in person, when I sit down to write, I think it just doesn't interest me to do that. Language and arguments and ideas seem more interesting than these squabbles. So it doesn't occur to me to say, well, a so-and-so, stupidly wrote about my piece. It seems unworthy of the language to do it. So I'm not even inclined to do that in print. Personally, again, is another thing. I'll fume just like anybody else will. Say one last thing about this. It's kind of funny. I had a little book that came out a few years ago, and it was reviewed not very favorably in The Economist, I think. And I remember talking to my colleagues, and I said, well, somebody who doesn't understand anything I've written. He's completely missed the point. He has no business doing this. And I said, and I do that to 25 authors a week, 52 weeks.
That's good. I have been speaking with Sam Tanenhaus, writer at large at the New York Times. Thanks very much, Sam. And I also want to just thank you personally for the years of joy that I've gotten from that podcast. It's just, I wish Pamela all the best, but there'll be nothing that can take away the pleasure that I've had listening to you so regularly. And I know many of my listeners feel the same way. So a heartfelt thank you.
I just love doing it. As I said, it's the thing I'll miss most.